Hi Philip, I've got three questions for you. The first question is, what is your approach to teaching and learning?
My approach to teaching and learning is one of conversation. So I take a conversational approach. I feel like in order to understand what's going on in here, we need to converse, and the way we converse in the classroom is via language, and that is why, for me, conversation is so important. There's no point in me just giving information. A teacher is thought of as an information source. Yes, that's true in part, but the internet and books and journals and YouTube videos and so forth also has information. So what separates me, the teacher, from an information source? Well, the teacher has to respond to the students, which means that the teacher has to be aware of who's in her class. There's no point just acting the same for every class you teach, because the students are different in every class. Therefore, the teacher needs to adapt. So a teacher has the ability to adapt to the individual learners in the class. And I know some people find that difficult with large classes, but I still maintain that it's possible. I like to converse with students. I like students to feel free to respond and to also generate their own topics. There's no point just the lecturer just speaking and speaking and speaking and speaking as I'm doing now, because these students then just form some sort of listening device. They just, do they even need to be in the class? They could just record the lecture and listen to it later. The point of the lecturer or the teacher for me is to make the world more intelligible and understandable to those who are seeking that knowledge. So in terms of, say, if you teach engineering, well, obviously the teacher, the engineering lecturer, would know more than the students, because the students are there in the class to learn from the lecturer. But there's no point in the lecturer just telling the students what and how to think. No, the lecturer needs to see where or hear and get an idea where the students are at. What is the student's understanding of their world? And the only way you can get that is by conversing. Otherwise, how else would you get that information? Unfortunately, we can't look into each other's eyes. Well, I can't. I know there are some shamans and some fancy people who can do that, but I can't look into students' eyes and see, this student does not understand the concept of a electronic device. I would need them to speak. So that is why I like a conversational approach to teaching and learning, and therefore the lecturer or the teacher also learns and participates, and unfortunately also has to be on his toes, because a student may bring up a topic which the lecturer does not know or understand, and therefore the lecturer will then need to find some way to understand that, and that will also give the teacher a way of seeing where his or her shortcomings are. So this is I would like to use the word hierarchical model. So that means that we're all on the same level. We've all got different roles, though. My job as the teacher is to make sure there's proof of learning. My job is not to boss students. My job is not to be more important. My job is to make sure there's proof of learning, and that learning can be fun. The idea of the lecturer being more important than the student, for me, is a myth, and I don't agree with it. I don't like a hierarchical model. Students should feel as equals, but obviously we've got different roles to play. My role is one of a teacher, and my job is to take things that are abstract and make them relevant. And in order to make it relevant, I need to know a little bit about the students in the class, so that I know what relevant is. For example, if we're going to talk about resonance, which is a type of waveform, maybe it can be described in terms of acoustics and music and speakers and discos and car sound, because that is often a fun topic for students, especially young people. And the only way you would know that is if the students are able to actually comment on that. So that's the conversational approach.
How is your approach shaped by the fourth industrial revolution?
Yeah, in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, for years I've been using blended learning, but I am a little bit wary of teachers who try too hard to abide by some goal that we must automate or become artificial teachers, and I don't like that. I'm worried that the minute you try and automate things too much, you lose the human effect or the human touch in teaching. Now, here's a brilliant example. Now you can hear this helicopter flying by during this interview, and that's the point of the human in the system. I'm the human, and therefore I can adapt to the here and now and the challenges that arise in the classroom. Now, say for example that helicopter that flew past, I am able to adapt right now, whereas if we automate things, we may not be able to adapt for the student in the class, and that means that we remove the immediacy. So what is the immediacy? The immediacy is something where the people in the class, or I like to call them actors, respond to each other based on the here and now, which means it's something that you cannot control. It's spontaneous, it's based on the personalities of the people in the class, and that for me is an extremely important feature of teaching and learning. At some point something happens, like, I understand that, or wow, the teacher was explained that well, or oh, my colleague, another fellow student had just answered a question, and now I understand from another student. And that type of chemistry requires, for me, active involvement. And I'm a little bit worried about one-sided automated learning. So I am somebody who does a lot of video presentations, and I also have a very strong YouTube personality. So I'm not against it, please. Don't get me wrong. It's just that it is one-sided, and you do need to find a way to get this balanced approach, which means you need some I don't want to really use the word feedback, but you need some feedback mechanism between teacher and learner and teacher, specifically without delay. And I've found that that's one of the challenges with the YouTube platform, is that sometimes there's delays. Someone may make a comment, you only get the comment much later, so you're answering their questions after some time has passed, and it can actually be quite difficult for the learning. And that is why in the classroom, spontaneous conversations based on the actors in the classroom as they participate together, for me, is a wonderful opportunity and environment for teaching and learning. So while I do agree with media and alternative methods and blended learning, I don't favor that in place of human-to-human teaching.
And finally, what is your advice to other teachers?
My advice to other teachers is based on a cybernetic principle called mutual reciprocity. How many times have you heard teachers saying, oh, these students, they're not good, or oh, the matrics of today, they don't understand, or things like that. I'm worried when people say things like that, because how you see the world will probably translate to how the world is. So if I arrive at a class and I see my students and I think, I've got a bad batch of students, well then guess what? I've just co-created a bad batch of students. And that's why I bring to this interview the words mutual reciprocity. If I want to believe that my students are good students, I need to believe that they have the capacity to be good. And in order for me to believe that, I have to actually see it in them. And that means that if I want to be a good teacher, I have to believe that the students have the capacity to see me as a good teacher. So that means that it's based on the here and now. I cannot own that attribute. I cannot own this thing. I'm a good teacher. No, it's something that you give me. You attribute that to me by saying, Philip, you're a good teacher. Yeah, thank you. Because somebody else might say, no, he's not a good teacher. Therefore, you can't own the label of good teacher or bad teacher. And therefore, the student cannot own the label of good student or poor student. This is something that we attribute to people. It's, this is a bad student. I'm actually giving that label to the student. So my advice to other teachers is, whatever you want to see, you actually have to believe that the student has that capability. And in the same way for yourself, if you want to believe that you're a good teacher, you have to believe that the students can see that in you. And unfortunately, that sometimes means engaging with the student to see where the gaps are, because sometimes we think we are behaving in a certain way, and actually the students might see that differently and say, no, he's not explaining himself well. And the only way to measure that is, unfortunately, is ask the students, am I a good teacher? Is the concepts that are brought to your attention useful? Do you understand what I'm saying? Is the class fun? And lecturers or teachers are often very shy to ask that question. Am I a good teacher? Do you think I'm a good teacher? How was this lecture for you? How would you tell me to improve it? And by putting yourself out there, I find like that really gives you the alignment to being much better teacher for that group. Remember that there's an immediacy factor here. For this group, you may find you're good. doing a certain behavior. But for another group, they may not want that. So the only way to resolve that is by engaging with the students to find out what their needs are. So for me to be a good teacher, it's better if I find out what the students are aiming for. And by knowing what the students aim for, I can help them in reaching their goal, or at least create an environment where they can reach their own goals. Okay, thank you. I hope that was helpful.